Hey, I'm Chuck Coffey. I've been on the program before. Thanks, Eric. I have a label called Snappy Little Numbers, and I play in a couple of bands, Spells and Chap, and got a buddy here today.
My name's Mike Taylor. I play in a band called Hooper, and it's my first time on the show. Thanks for having me.
All right, gentlemen, thank you both very much for sitting down and talking. Uh, I'm always looking for excuses to get Chuck back on the show and talk. I talk to you all the time, and it's fun sometimes just hit record when we talk. So
Yeah.
we were bouncing around ideas, and you were really stoked about the idea of kind of doing a special episode just discussing what we're calling alt country and Americana. And kind of going into this episode, I was a little, I don't want to say nervous, but I was like, what am I gonna bring to the table? Because like, what is my connection? What is my attachment? And then, I'm listening to my playlist when my airplane is flying or whatever, and I'm flying back home, and like probably the second most popular Chuck in the world, Chuck Reagan, his solo stuff hits, and I'm like, maybe this is kind of in that niche, right? And then I'm thinking
Oh,
about like
For
absolutely.
sure. Yep.
the
Sure.
Tim Berries of the world. I'm thinking about, my hometown heroes of Chamberlain. Like they also recorded the song with Brian Fallon of Gaslight Anthem. I'm like, maybe
There you
maybe
go.
there's more to it than I thought
And,
there
and
was.
that's the thing. Is that a lot of people don't realize it or under or even they're not aware that it's basically like it's a very similar genre back to even some early country. And it's interesting. I think a lot of people, a lot of the punk rockers, if they begin to mellow or they just don't have the time or the energy to hang out with four or five other people, they kind of pick up the acoustic guitar and try and translate what they do to that. And a lot of people, it works really well.
The age aging punk rockers as well. Kind of maybe mellow out a little bit, but it's still a similar ethos.
Yeah.
And that was a big part of it for me anyway.
I think part of it too is also you know, touring. Like, I mean, obviously there are all country Americana bands, but a lot of the people that do the solo thing, they can tour whenever they want by themselves, and it's way easier than, you know, packing up the van
Yeah.
versus just rolling with a guitar and, your sedan.
So I mean, I guess right from your perspective, where can we trace the origins, right? Like, is it a Johnny Cash kind of thing, or is it?
Straight, I mean, I think me personally, and this is what I kind of talked to Mike about, I think Um, they probably weren't necessarily the first band to do it, but I always think of Uncle Tupelo as kind of being
Mhm.
the starting point of kind of like, punk rock ethics meets, yeah, like twangy rock with the old country influence kind of thing.
And you can also kind of go to, what in the 80s they kind of dubbed like college rock, like the Jayhawks and stuff like that. Kind of
Yeah.
gets, I wouldn't necessarily say it's the same, but that's, all that stuff, is all kind of adjacent to each other, I feel like. And so, one thing can influence another and it all just kind of flows in and out. Um, that's sort of, I mean, how I got into it. I was pretty much just a punk only kid. That's all I listened to. Um, and then one day, so I was living in Fort Collins, and my friend took me to a show, and it was this band called Drag the River. And I don't know if you're familiar with them or not, but it's Chad
Yes.
Price from All. And at the time, Carl Alvarez was the bass player. And so I was like, they play country? Like, what are you talking about? And when I went, and it blew my mind. And from that, and I always kind of fought being a country fan. I grew up between Kansas and Wyoming, so it's my dad loved country music, And so, I fought it being a punk rock kid as long as I could. And then, you see, you know, it was Carl Alvarez playing in a country band really was like, holy shit, this is awesome.
Yeah.
Um,
Because I never really consider like I would say growing up, I would definitely say like I couldn't stand
yeah,
country, but most of what you're exposed to,
yeah, is
like with
the
Alabama
yeah,
and
like
and
radio
yeah, like
country,
like Nashville pop
terrible.
country.
Yeah,
But when I would hear stuff like Hank Williams or Merle Haggard or
sure.
Johnny Cash, it's like, well, that's pretty cool and that's
Yeah,
country. But it's like it seemed like there were decades that went by where you weren't hearing things where it was more like, or even like, kind of like the Woody Guthrie kind of, a lot of that was kind of protest music and, like working class kind of music. And then it got polished and had that sheen on it that to me felt inauthentic, but, it kind of got, when the dirty rockers started incorporating that and it felt like it felt more honest and real again to me. So and also I don't mind a little twang here and there, but a lot of the bands that I like that we started seeing in the late 90s, early 2000s, there's a little twang, but it wasn't like a shtick,
yeah.
like a lot of bands are kind of like it's like a wink and a nod that yeah, it's country, but this was just it was like roots music, with the rock edge, and any twang was just basically because it fit stylistically as opposed to being almost a gimmick.
Yeah, I think, I mean, I got into it way, way later than both of you did. It feels like, just based on what you guys are talking about. Because I grew up northern Indiana, where there was a big country influence, but it
Sure.
was that terrible pop country. Like I remember going like the county fair and seeing Billy Ray Cyrus and seeing everybody doing like the weird line dancing to "Achy Breaky Heart" and wondering like people actually really
Yeah.
and truly
I mean,
enjoy
and
this.
that's what almost blew my mind about it when I discovered, the kind of all country stuff is like you can see how they're related, but they're
Yeah.
so vastly different that it really was mind blowing for me.
I mean, I wouldn't say it's similar to even like discovering punk rock in that like you're familiar with rock music or you're familiar with country and there might not be a lot that's really catching your ear and then you find out about this whole other world. And people that play pop country or love to listen to pop country, I mean, like, cool. Like, if that's your thing, that's great. But it surprised me that I would become, a fan of something like that's not that far off from that when you consider the larger
Yeah.
picture.
It on obviously, honestly, actually, but getting into like the alt stuff, it actually opened my mind a little bit more to accepting more of the kind of mainstream stuff. Now, still, no way like Billy Ray
Yeah,
Cyrus,
no, I agree with
but
that
like
though.
I actually, got to where I really like Garth Brooks and stuff like that.
I got a
You
new
know, but
appreciation for that.
but as a 17-year-old kid, there's no way.
Uh-uh.
So now as a 46-year-old man, it's a little bit different.
Well, the thing that's also pretty interesting is every genre has, its different cycles and ups and downs, but there are a lot of people like, obviously Wilco is very successful and, that's, Jeff Tweedy goes back to Uncle Tupelo and I'd say a band like My Morning Jacket kind of falls in there from time to time. And there's like a lot of crossover kind of stuff, but
Yeah,
there's a lot of bands that I mean they are mainstream bands on the radio or on the top of the Spotify playlist or
yeah,
whatever.
and a lot of and at least I feel like now, a lot of the top kind of mainstream country artists sound more like alt country stuff than, the 90s kind of country
Yeah.
stuff like that, like Zach Bryan or whatever. I mean, I he's kind of a D-bag, but
But yeah, definitely like
but that kind of stuff, you like you kind of hear some of that stuff and you're like, I mean, that's right, maybe a little more polished or whatever, and a little more aimed at the country masses. Um, but you can definitely tell that it's definitely influenced like what's popular now. Um, but then it's cool to see for me even like kind of bigger artists, and you find out about their like punk backgrounds, like if
yeah,
Orville Peck.
yeah,
um he was actually in a punk band from Canada called New Sensei,
yeah,
and
that's
they're
right.
they're like freaking hardcore, like they're awesome, and then he played drums in that band, so you never knew that he could sing at all. And now he's like this, beautiful like crooner. And
Mhm.
like it's just a crazy, you hear that kind of stuff, and all these, that shows like, sometimes I feel like punk musicians get overlooked of talent,
Yeah.
but then someone like that pops up and you're like, yeah, no, like they know how to play and
Mhm.
whatnot. But
And I think there's also, especially in the last few years, there's been like there seems to be like a real melding also with, that kind of like alt country or like roots kind of music, and maybe like the more like I don't even know what you call it, like folkier side with or like I don't like what would you call Iron and Wine or like Fleet Foxes? It's
yeah, I would have. Yeah, that would be more folky, I
but
would think, but it's still, I mean, all that stuff.
but all those things are now like very popular
Yeah,
with like the core marketing
yeah,
audience that all these, it's like the
yeah,
the 20 somethings or like that's
yeah,
so huge.
yeah, yeah. And even in like, I feel like those bands started getting huge in like the late teens,
Hmm. I
like
agree.
Lumineers and stuff like that,
Yeah.
popped up. And,
Yeah.
but all that stuff, they all trace back, I mean, to you know music scene, whatever town they came from. Most of them probably started playing in shitty punk bands when they were in high school and early 20s.
Yeah, I think it's telling that that's um for as when you think at least, I mean, if you're not a huge music fan and you maybe hear punk music, you think like not, like more attitude, less talent, but really it's like it's the gateway to a lot of people
Yeah,
discovering that they're actual musicians and that, they have growth and talent that changes over time. And you can get that from any genre, but it's just kind of like it's cool to see people that it's like you start a punk band because it's accessible and you learn about there's anybody can learn three chords and start a band, and that's basically true, but you don't really hear much of the rest of the story of all the people that like so many people go on to do much more than that, um and that's just it seems like the people that kind of start there, like their music also just seems more authentic. And I think they've spent more time doing like, being in the van, like, traveling around playing for 20, 30 people before they start picking up an audience versus, like moving to a big city and getting a manager and like finding a producer and how a lot of the other pop stuff kind of happens.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, you guys are mentioning bands like Wilco and Fleet of Foxes and stuff because way back in the day, like 20 years ago, when I was a high school teacher, the guy who taught like two classrooms or three classrooms down from me, he was like huge, huge hipster. And that was all the stuff that he was into, like kind of before it was mainstream. I think it was Paste magazine. I don't know, it was something like that. Like he got me like a subscription to, and it was literally like all of those kind of bands.
Yeah.
And kind of a stupid story, but I remember one day he was like, "Hey Eric, do you like Band of Horses, and I was like, no, I've never even heard of them before. I was like, but I really like Horse the band. And he was like, oh, I'll have to check them out. And the next day he came in, he was like, that was not my kind of music. I was like, like we're a little
Yeah,
different
that's
there.
a
But
little.
that's actually a great example of one of those bands that kind of like Band of
Yeah,
Horses straddles a lot of that and has become like very popular music
yeah,
like amongst, like like young adults or whatever.
yeah,
I mean, I think it's funny, right? Like, Mike, you were talking about Drag the River. Like, I remember seeing them all the time at the Fireside Bowl. Like, it seems like they had like a second home in Chicago or whatever.
sure.
Um, but then, like, I think about like bands like Drive By Truckers or something like that, where
Yeah,
like they were touring with punk bands, they were playing in
yeah,
punk venues, and then they
yeah,
became like,
yeah,
mainstream, wide appeal, and it's
yeah.
it's weird how that worked out.
Well, yeah. I mean, I just feel like you know, it's a lot of similar ethos with those bands, and it just kind of made sense. And I mean, like bands like Lucero too had a huge. They were huge here in Denver. They were
Yeah.
everybody's favorite for a few years there. And I mean that's I after I'd say about 3 months after seeing Drag the River, for maybe 6 months, I conned some people into starting a all country band myself, and I did that for about 5 years here, and it was fun. It was still that's I'd played in ska bands before that. And that was all I'd ever really. I taught myself to play bass. Like it like I got that. I mean, I got that like into it that I was like, I want to play in a band to do this, more than rock or metal or something like that. That was like what I had really wanted to do, and duped three people into doing it with me, and we had a decent run there for a minute.
What was your band called,
My
Mike?
band was called Out on Bail, which is horrible, horrible name.
That's pretty great. It's pretty great.
And it was fun, I feel like it was the band that I learned how to be in a band pretty much, and very fond memories of that band, and still are friends with the other members today. But it was, yeah, we like I didn't know how to play. Chuck showed me like like a few different things, and I just kind of figured it out.
You
Um,
picked it up super fast.
it's pretty quick, and I learned how to sing at the same time. Like I was so like gung ho about doing it, and
Yeah, because you were a trumpet
I
player.
played trumpet. Yep, and then ended up playing. We did another band called Call Sign Cobra, and it was like a um rocket from the crib kind of style band, and with a horn section. So I played trumpet in that with Chuck, and I tried to get Chuck to be an Out on Bail, and he came to one practice and then said he didn't want to do it. But fine, it was okay. It worked out. It worked out. So
Well, I think part of it was I didn't want to drive 90 minutes
yeah,
to
yeah, we were
practice.
we were practicing in Fort Collins,
And
and then
that's
that lasted like 3 weeks, and then we're like, then we found somebody else in Denver, and it was better. So, but I got super into it, and I feel like right around the same time that we started, there was a few other kind of bands in the same vein that all popped up at the
yeah,
same time, and
yeah.
we played a lot together, and you know, and that scene went hand in hand with the Denver punk scene. I mean, it was, and that was what I loved is that we would play with the punk bands too, like, and it was interchangeable, and it was super fun and eclectic, and everybody was real supportive of it, and it was a lot of fun,
Yeah.
and yeah, and it's been fun to like when Chuck told me about doing this, so I've kind of revisited a lot of stuff. I kind of maybe hadn't listened to it as much as I once did, but I've definitely like kind of gotten back into it now. And there's some new artists that I've really gotten into that I would still consider uh, in that vein. You talk about being from Northern Indiana. Is that correct?
Yep.
Have you heard Steven Wilson Jr.? Have
I
you
have
heard of?
I have not, no.
He is awesome. You should check him out. Um, he's kind of has a similar story, was in like rock bands and stuff, but like found his way to country. His whole story is pretty cool. I won't get into it here, but so that's who kind of my, you know, who I've been listening to a lot for lately of that genre. He's great.
Cool. Through some of my work, I haven't listened to them a lot, but I think Adrian Linker, have you heard of?
Mhm.
That's that seems like similar genre-wise,
Yeah,
and that's a lot of people have asked me to play that at some of their events.
nice.
Yeah.
Sturgill Simpson
Oh
is
yeah.
another big one. I'm sure he's pretty massive at this point, but like he's great. I got into him. He did a Nirvana cover, and then that's how I
Oh
heard
yeah.
that, and then I was like, "Oh, this guy's great,"
Mm.
stuff like that. And that's what's cool about those kind of bands too, is like they cover a lot of rock and punk songs,
Yeah.
and it really, for me, especially with early on, like that kind of stuff really like help make that transfer. Like Drag the River did a Misfits cover, and it was so awesome. I forget which song it was, but I was like, "That's awesome!" Like a country version of the Misfits was pretty cool. Um, and
And also like, even though sometimes the music might be like a little pulled back, there's still a lot of bands that were up tempo and their shows were
yeah,
super fun. Like, I mean, you 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 got me and Feb on the path to old
yeah,
97s, and
yeah,
that's a fantastic band. And
yeah,
we saw them almost every time they
yeah.
came. It was so good.
I think we went to a couple shows together, in fact,
I
for
think
sure.
so.
Yeah, that was it was another friend got me into those guys too. That was early on, and there was especially then there was a ton of bands like doing that kind of stuff that
That to me, that kind of seems like the first, like it's not the first era, but it's like the first like golden
yeah, like
era, like because Wilco and
yeah,
Sunvolt and Old
like
97 and Jayhawks
Ryan
and
Adams. I mean,
was
he
that Whiskey Town
Whiskey
was the
Town
first
first, and
thing,
then he did solo.
right?
Yeah,
But yeah, just like that whole thing
yeah,
kind of became like the underground alt
yeah,
country, like the torchbearers
yeah.
kind of thing.
I'm
Um,
I'm curious then, since you guys are the experts, like, we talked a little bit about kind of the OG country scene, right? Like Hank Sr. and Merle Haggard and all those guys, right? Like
Yeah.
that was definitely politically charged protest music,
Yeah,
right? Like that
no,
they were like, punk before punk was a
sure.
yeah.
thing, right?
And all those bands like love, Johnny and Merle Haggard and like all those kind of guys. Like
Yeah.
and then as I got more into the genre, then that's I got really into Hank Williams and all that kind of stuff. But we really found our way to Neil Young was
Oh
that's a
yeah.
huge influence on the genre in general. I mean, it's like, you know, because he would have this stripped down, slow stuff, and then he'd have Rockin' in the Free World, which is, one of the, and we actually covered that, and it was super fun to play every show. Like,
He's definitely a bridge
yeah,
a
yeah,
couple times over.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And but as again as I got more into the genre, then I got more into like the history and like Willie Nelson and just going and Willie Nelson is badass.
Hmm.
Like he don't give a fuck. He's just like it's awesome. Like
And like also I got into through like Loretta Lynn
yeah.
and Wanda Jackson
Yeah, well, and then another crossover, Loretta Lynn did that record with
with Jack
Jack
White.
White, which was really good too. It was essentially a White Stripes record with Loretta Lynn singing. It
Yeah,
was pretty
it was
cool.
good.
It's hard to find these days,
Is it?
actually. It's not on like Spotify and
Huh.
stuff like that. I've looked for it because there's like one tune, and when I was
Oh
kind of
yeah.
revisiting stuff and trying to to talk to you about this, I couldn't find it, and I
Mhm.
was bummed out, kind of. So. Jack White, if you're watching this, you got to put that on Spotify, buddy.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. As soon as, once he catches wind of this.
yeah.
So, I guess at least from my perspective, why do we think it skipped kind of that generation, right? Because that second generation of country like really leaned into that pop. I mean, I'm sure there were like underground, but I mean, I think like Hank Jr. and right again like whatever the Billy Ray Cyrus is the world, like all those guys kind of moved away from that, and then
You
the
know,
third generation now is kind of that alt country that we're kind of delving into, which was punk adjacent or
no, I kind of think it ties in with it because it was like the 80s. I mean, like everything was, just commercialized, like glam, like hair metal bands and stuff. And I feel like like the pop country was kind of the same approach, like super like clean and like overproduced and stuff. And I think that that's just, and then I think this stuff, just like kind of around the same time that punk had its resurgence, this kind of stuff started popping up again too. Like just because us Gen Xers like are like this shit sucks,
Yeah.
and so it just kind of was a natural response.
And so I feel like I kind of got by the end of the double O early
Yeah.
tens, I was kind of burned out on a lot of that stuff.
Yeah, same.
But there's still a lot of good acts. But I also think, especially over the last like 5, 6 years, just with I mean, the internet plus streaming, and a lot of younger people can now
Yeah.
they have, you know, decades at their
Yeah.
fingertips, and a lot of young bands are mixing genres and doing all sorts of different like throwback
Yeah.
sounds, where it's like, maybe like the fourth or fifth wave of
Yeah.
some of this stuff, and a lot of it is, like there's a lot more influence to draw from when there's like the potential to find sounds is
Yeah.
limitless.
Well, even like now, kind of later, like them, like even like the hip hop world is melding some of it.
That's
Like
totally true.
that Beyonce record was pretty good. Like her,
And
it.
and Lil Nas
Yeah,
X,
yeah,
yeah.
So I mean, that's what's cool about it, I think, is like that it just, like it had such a stigma for me when I was a kid, but
Yeah.
like it really is, the pure form of it is really good music, and it shows and it influences
And I mean,
everything.
country and Western and R&B had a ton in
Yeah, yeah,
common, like
sure.
in the 60s.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
um, so I mean, it makes sense that so I'm sure people have always been doing it, but that like, famous people these days like have dipped their toes into
yeah,
that, and
yeah,
it's proving successful.
yeah.
Yeah.
interesting. So yeah, what I guess other than age and maybe slowing down, what is it that do you guys think kind of appeals to punk rockers? Because I know, like for example, you mentioned like Ryan Adams. I remember again, right, that teacher that was super into that stuff. Um, I was like, hey, did you ever know he was in like a punk band called The Finger? He was like, no. I was like, you got to check it out. Like even a lot of guys like that you would never think of, or even like
Yeah, I
whatever.
mean, I think like those kind of guys. I mean, I feel like that the old version, like I feel like the lyrics were better. Like there was this. I honestly feel like sometimes those bands took like kind of like the emo approach to songwriting with like deeper lyrics and just more emotional you know ties to the listener, like
And I think
and that's what those the followers of those bands like Wilco too, those, I mean,
I think for better or
people go
worse.
to every show and buy every, like every record. They put out like 30 records or something like that.
And
And
for better or worse, it's also a more accessible sound.
yeah,
So a lot of
for
these people
sure.
came up in punk bands with a limited audience, and
Yeah,
they were like, "Well, I still want to play music and
yeah,
try and make a living, and so I'm going to try this other stuff with a broader appeal."
yeah.
In theory,
In theory, yeah.
So I mean, like you think that's what it was, that the punk there was a thriving punk scene or whatever, so that was more accessible for them. But they kind of had their sights set on, I guess, pure musicianship or whatever
Maybe
that
that's
might
not
be,
how
that
it
path.
started, but they discovered that about themselves. Because I think there is a difference between being in a band and being a musician, and nothing's wrong with either one.
Yeah.
But being in a band is hanging with your buddies, being along for the ride. And when the band ends, you might not ever play in a band again. But if you're a musician, you'll be in a band, and you'll always, even if you're not always in a band, you'll always be playing music. And I don't mean musician like you're some sort of like, fancy artist type or whatever, but you're
Studio
just, yeah, but it's
musician.
just like you just enjoy playing
Yeah.
music, and it's not just the thing you did at this time and point in your life, like happens with a lot of people. And no judgment there either. Like, people find different hobbies all the time and get involved in different friend circles all the time. And being in a band sometimes is just the pit stop on someone's life story, and there's nothing wrong with that.
Do you think there's just something about that composition of, a person and an acoustic guitar that kind of drives them towards that sound? Because I mean, again, right, like thinking, I don't know if it's just that influence in the punk scene, but I think a lot of people who have gone that acoustic route, they just tend to lean in that direction. Is it just
I think I think a lot of the people that do that through playing in a band, they discovered that they were songwriters. And
Mm.
and and w- I've heard a lot of people say, and even experience, if you write a song and it sounds good on an acoustic guitar, it's a good song. Like, because it's just the main music and your voice carrying the melody. And if that sounds good, then it's gonna sound good, whatever you wind up doing with it. And I think a lot of people, just from a pure like songwriting standpoint, found that to be kind of, clear, like kind of clearing the desk and starting from scratch kind of thing, and keeping it simple. And then a bunch of people that were doing the solo thing, I think it was out of a lot out of convenience, and because it's also easy to like hop on shows at the last minute or like tour along with another band because you're just one person. And then as you gain more success, you put like a band together around it.
that makes sense? I mean, right, me personally, even though Chuck, I know you and I have talked many times about how I usually lean towards the heavier types of music. I mean, thinking about like a Chuck Reagan solo album compared to like a whatever Chris Carrabba solo Dashboard, like
Mhm.
that speaks to me all day every day way more than kind of the other kind of acoustic. So
Yeah.
yeah, I think there's something like like you were saying maybe about the emotional aspect, but I think there's just something that appeals more so about that alt country kind of tinge to the music.
I mean, me too. And I think a lot of it is also, just stylistic, like just the audio wise, like orally, it's just like I am more drawn to an electric guitar and drums than an acoustic guitar. Like, it doesn't mean it has to be, punk or metal, but like, where some of the artists that are more, not as just 6-minute acoustic songs, but 3-minute, kind of pop structure, like root songs. Like, it appeals to me more on several different levels. And one of them is just because it's more pleasing to my ear.
So as both of you guys as musicians then approaching music like that, is it more freeing or less freeing, right? Because again, if you're doing punk or rock or whatever with a normal electric guitar, you can have your gigantic pedal board with 7 different effects and everything. But when I think about like alt country, it's usually fairly stripped down. So is that more freeing or is that more constricting?
I I think
Or am I
find
completely wrong?
a lot of people find out, um, and whether they accept it or not, that you might not be as good as you think you are.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of people that kind of try and do that thing, and it's kind of uh, like you have to actually you have to be pretty skilled to pull that off and be good at it, I
Mhm.
think. And in that, it might be, I don't know, there might be more freeing in that I know it's got to build a lot of confidence, like in your just ability to perform, because you're not hiding behind anything.
Yeah.
Like even if you're a good musician, like playing a distorted guitar, even if you're like an ace musician, like if you make a mistake, like the distortion covers up a lot of that stuff. Whereas if it's just an acoustic guitar and your voice, every mistake is right
Yeah.
out, hanging out in front of you.
Yeah, that that actually makes a lot of sense thinking about, just the that person up on stage, even for open mic night or something. I mean, that would, like you said, it builds confidence, but the crowd feedback's gonna let you know pretty quickly if that's where you're supposed to be or not.
Yeah, yeah. And I think also, but like anything, like if you start off not that good, you shouldn't stop.
Yeah.
Like keep going if you're really into it and you love it and you feel like you have something. But yeah, it's definitely I think some people and I haven't experienced this recently, but especially like during kind of like the wave that we experienced with like the Drag the River Lucero and like other people like going that direction. There were some people that had come from bands that I think, once the band broke up, they thought the next step was to do the acoustic thing, and it just
Hmm. Yeah.
it didn't work. That didn't wind up being in their wheelhouse, and effort for trying,
Yeah.
but it definitely not everyone that like fronts a band can do that by themselves.
Yeah, I mean, I think of some of the way back in the day, the pre-internet era where it would be so and so of whatever band's releasing a acoustic album. You're like, hey, like I really love that band. I'll check it out. I was like, ooh, no, like
Yeah,
it didn't translate very well. So
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. It can be tough, um, but yeah, so I don't know if that really answered your question. I think it's freeing for people that discover that they're gifted songwriters, and if they can go from playing in a loud punk band to playing um, like finger pick an acoustic
Yeah.
guitar and use your voice to hold someone's attention, and then all of a sudden you can probably do anything you want with music ever, like at any point. Like if you can cross that barrier, like there's nothing that can stop you creatively because you've already boiled it down to the bare essence and caught attention just with that.
yeah, because I mean, again, right, thinking about like the Tim Berries of the world, and it seems like whenever he's in an interview or talking or whatever, like that acoustic that approach for him is what appeals to him way more than playing with a veil. Like for whatever reason, that's kind of where he feels he belongs. Then I
Mm.
think on the other side, I mean, obviously Chuck Reagan has released a ton of solo albums and then quasi solo albums and everything else, but I feel like his heart belongs more in hot water music. So. I mean, I don't know if it just depends on that musician, if they
Yeah.
like that feeling of the
Yeah.
band behind them.
And I think a lot of those guys go back and forth too. Like,
Of course.
even Nathaniel.
Mhm.
Our friend Nathaniel Rayliff from Denver. He had a rock background. And then he's obviously gone on to mega stardom now. But they have the big soul band, and then he comes out with a solo record. And he goes back and forth. And I think that's just how they all go. Like, they'll do a heavier record maybe, and then a couple strip downs, and then they go back and forth.
Yeah,
And
like
uh,
just as much as someone that plays rock music might do
yeah,
an electronic side
yeah,
project,
yeah,
someone else
yeah.
does an acoustic thing.
I mean, I definitely like my musical career here in Denver. None of my bands have sounded anything the same. Every band that I've been in is like totally different, just because I was like different itches for different things.
Yeah,
Like,
you're playing with different people
yeah,
and
yeah.
yeah,
And so, that's, how it was for me. Like, especially back then too, like all of us played in multiple bands at the same time too. And, none of mine sounded the same. I tried hard not to actually
yeah.
kind of,
I never played when I was in multiple bands, it had to be a different instrument and a
Yeah,
different sound. Otherwise, I didn't really see the point
yeah,
in doing it. Like, I mean, you might like the people, but it's,
yeah,
it's like I already play in a band like this, or I already
yeah.
play this instrument. And if I'm gonna, I want to, and I think also playing that variety makes you a better player and it makes you appreciate all your other bands because
Mhm.
you're drawing from a larger pool of experiences.
Yeah.
So and I
Well,
think that's probably a lot of why the whole singer-songwriter thing coming from bands or going solo, it's just they're music fans and they're songwriters and they're willing to try a
mhm.
bunch of different things.
Yeah. Thinking about it while we've been talking, I feel like that alt country, Americana, punk adjacentness has been kind of the thing that has withered the test of time compared to a lot of the other weird gimmicky things that have kind of cropped up in the punk scene. What do you think? Is it just that trueness of the music and the musicianship that is kind of given it its longevity, or is it because it's not coming from a gimmick? Is it because people's taste have changed and it's kind of become more popular through the last 20, like, I mean, I think about like a lot of the really stupid gimmicks that we've had in the last
Yeah.
25 years through punk and hardcore. And
I,
again, right, go and drag the river 25 years ago, and that kind of music is still thriving and is still succeeding.
I
And
I think I mean, it all goes back to, I mean, just even like early guitar music, like blues, Robert
Mhm.
Johnson, the person and a guitar telling a story. So that will work forever.
Yeah,
If you're good, it will work forever.
yeah.
but what specifically do you think, I guess, makes the punk scene in general kind of embrace that, at least as maybe its smaller cousin compared to some of the other trends that have just kind of gone the way of the dodo?
I feel like it's always to a certain degree like represented being a part of like a counterculture or like going against the grain kind of thing. You're not necessarily doing what's expected of you or what the traditional blueprint for life would be. Like you feel a pull to do something different and that's a lot of music comes from that.
Okay. Um, Obviously you two are way more kind of involved in that scene than I was. It was just always kind of on the peripheral for my music listening. I mean, how do you feel about the way that it's evolved, since you got into it 20 plus years ago, and or has it? I mean, I guess, because like you said, it's really stripped down, but has it as a scene matured, even though the music type is what the music type is, or
That's why Mike's here.
Yeah. You know, that's tough. I don't know if it's really matured that much, honestly. Like I think it just became more more mainstream in the country world. And so bands that were doing that became more successful and more accessible to everyone. And so then, then it falls into, kind of where it was with the 90s, country stuff of like, you know, for me, I there were bands I followed and I liked, and then they as the albums went along, I got less and less into them, and I mean that happens with most genres, I feel like, and so for me, I did kind of lose interest in it, but have recently, started listening to it again. But I find my way back to the stuff from the early aughts as opposed to anything that's super new,
Yeah.
with the exception of a few artists here and there like Orville Peck and Steven Wilson and stuff like that. But so I feel there are. I feel overall it just became more commercialized, I suppose.
That's
Which
fair.
is fine. I mean, good on those bands for making a couple bucks. Um, you know, uh, but it's with any of I mean that happened in for punk bands too. Like, some of those, like got massive.
Oh yeah, I mean
Green Day got massive.
yeah,
like
I mean hip hop was like that
yeah,
too.
yeah, yeah,
Like everything starts smaller
yeah, yeah,
underground, and
yeah,
then people find success, and then the business people start getting
yeah,
involved, and then
yeah,
that's where the lines start being drawn
yeah,
between that's may perhaps
yeah.
like
And
actual
yeah,
what you want to do versus what you're being told to do
and
kind of thing.
yeah. I mean, I'm sure there were as many bands as ever doing it.
Yeah,
I just wasn't as immersed in it as I once was.
yeah.
And also the bands that then I was had moved into playing, I was kind of more into kind of stuff that I was playing too. So I actually got, we were talking about kind of getting softer as you get older. I actually got into like heavier bands as I went along. So uh, I went reverse. I'm in like a punk band now, and then started in a country band. So I went backwards a little bit, but
Yeah, I mean,
and
I
then I did like
definitely,
a hardcore band in between.
I mean,
So,
I never really, I never, once I discovered punk rock, like I never strayed
yeah,
super
no,
far
no,
from it,
me
but I
either.
will say, like, there was definitely a time and period where I was exploring, other kinds of music, and
Sure.
then came back more to punk, and
Yeah,
I was enjoying it more and found it
yeah,
refreshing.
same.
Yeah.
Like everything for it, goes in waves. To I mean, still like of stuff I listen to, even like getting back into hair metal stuff. Like that stuff's always fun.
I
Like
I
I
that's
I
I never liked
I
that.
like hair metal way more now than I did when it was a
Man,
thing.
I can't. I
So
There's a couple of songs that
yeah,
I'm
yeah.
like, yeah, that's
I
a
mean,
cool
I'm not,
song, but
it's
yeah,
not my favorite thing,
yeah.
but
I never had a Motley Crue t-shirt.
yeah, yeah. But so like, and I revisit stuff. I feel it's pretty, you know, every couple of years or so,
Mhm.
I'll find my way back to stuff that I love. I've had a big resurgence of stuff from like the mid aughts, like that I've been listening to a lot. Even
Cool.
like some of the some of the like the indie rock bands like TV on the radio and stuff. Like I've
Mhm.
been listening to a lot of that kind of stuff lately. Of just kind of that era
Mhm.
of stuff. And a lot of those bands are doing reunions now.
Yeah,
Like TV on the radio just did some big tour.
yeah,
Like so everything cycles. I feel like, and you find your way, especially if you loved it at one point, you find your way back to it.
yeah.
Um, yeah,
So, as musicians, right, especially if you're talking the kind of the singer-songwriter approach to all country, is there, I guess, pressure then for the kind of music output that you're going to do? Because I always think about, especially like punk bands, right? Like as a listener, you find out whatever band it is that you like has a new album coming out. So your concern is always going to be, is it the sound of that band that I love,
sure,
or are they going to change that sound? Um, and depending on where your age is, probably going to be something that I'm not going to enjoy as much as I
sure.
did before. But if it's just you with the guitar, like, does that change your approach? Does that mean that all of your albums sound the same? Or you're like, hey, let's throw some steel drums on this album, or like, whatever kind of changes and evolutions you can do for that? Or do you think it's relatively safe? I mean, again, right, like thinking of my limited experience, it seems like if I like one of their albums, I'm gonna like all of their albums within that realm of all country, at least with the solo work.
Um, I mean, I feel like it just depends on the artist. Like, some guys are more willing to try different stuff, and some guys they got it locked in, and if they keep making hit records, then they don't change the formula. So, um, I would like to think that I would experiment more, but um, I don't write anything anymore, so
Mhm.
it's fine. So,
I mean, it especially, I think another reason why it's kind of blown up more, and also why people do evolve, into different forms of music. I mean, the biggest example is Taylor Swift. Like, all what she basically sounds like Bon Iver from 2008,
Right.
you know, and like that's not a knock.
No,
It's just
yeah, yeah,
like now millions of people love
yeah,
that sound,
yeah,
when before it was tens of thousands.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I have apparently I'm the minority opinion about Taylor Swift, but I always wonder about the music industry at the heart of how she started off kind of country as a product of the Nashville scene and then kind of became the pop sensation that she was, and if that's really the
I
love
think
for the
through
music or the love for the success.
I honestly, my interpretation is she came to discover that she was uh a lifelong musician, music fan, songwriter, and appreciative of all that music has to offer. It's just her path to it was wildly different
Yeah.
than the rest of
Well, and
most people.
I feel like she's a big part of her success is like her lyrics are pretty good
Mhm.
compared to a lot of other pop music.
Yeah,
And that's why I feel like her fans are so like devoted to her because they feel a lot of meaning in
yeah.
her songs. Like it resonates with them, as opposed to some other pop stars are just, doing the thing or whatever, which good for them too. But like I feel like that's why she's kind of struck such a chord with people.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah.
A little off topic, but does she even write all of her own lyrics? Because I know that she has like a whole team of songwriters behind her. I don't
I
know.
mean, I feel like she writes most of them. I'm sure she has people that help her, but like,
I would say I mean I don't really know. I haven't like read any credits for a
yeah,
while, but I think she probably writes a lot of her lyrics. But as far as the music, a
yeah,
lot of it now is like MIDI Pro Tools,
yeah,
like,
yeah,
and
yeah,
it based off maybe a riff or two, but definitely like that Jack Antonoff
yeah,
produces a
yeah,
lot of
yeah,
stuff. So
yeah.
there's a lot of
I think she's the lyricist,
yeah.
but not the. She doesn't like write the tune
I think
anymore.
she's one of the five
Yeah,
songwriters
yeah,
maybe on some of that
yeah,
stuff, but still,
yeah,
yeah, like you said, wrote the lyrics.
Oh, okay. That's
I mean, that's just what I
yeah.
think.
That's it. Yeah, I don't. I'm not.
And that's
I'm
kind of
not.
what I gleaned off whatever
Yeah,
that documentary on Netflix was
yeah,
a few years ago, because she was in the studio and she didn't record an instrument in that whole thing.
yeah,
The engineer and the
yeah,
producers were doing all the
yeah,
stuff, and then she would write in the
yeah,
back and then sing on it.
yeah.
yeah, because there's a I guess I don't know if you would even consider her to be old country, but Caitlin Rose, and I became a fan of hers, and I was looking up like information about her. Apparently, her mom like made millions writing hit songs for Taylor Swift. Like that's kind of how she came into being. And
I
then,
don't know who
you
Caitlin
know,
Rose is.
I don't
her
know. I don't
her
know.
mom kind of like whatever, I don't know if she like bankrolled her first demo or however that worked out, but like her whole story was that she grew up like in the Nashville
Who are you
music
talking?
scene.
We don't know who Caitlin Rose is.
Yeah, we don't know shit. Yeah.
She's a maybe somebody we're checking out, I guess.
All right. Yeah, yeah.
No, but I mean, so she's an all country person.
Yes. I mean, I don't think alt country in the way that we've kind of talked about it for our purposes, but I
Okay,
think like that alternative, like actual alternative country,
sure.
the country with like an alternative rock tinge. I think her older stuff anyway, her new stuff is kind of a little more poppy with a little more like electronic, like you said, maybe.
Gotta put it on the list. Eric, you know someone that we don't. Gotta put it on the list.
Wow. That might be the first time ever that has ever happened for you and I. So
I would think it can't be, but it kind of I think it is.
I mean, like, if we want to go down that rabbit hole for like, heavy late 90s hardcore bands, I'm sure there's plenty that I know of that you don't. But I mean,
That's
as
probably
far
true.
as
Yeah, that
But I
but
do.
late '90s hardcore bands. I wouldn't know much. So yeah,
But that's cool. I mean, thanks for. That's why I asked, because I've always I want to know about anybody
yeah, for
doing,
sure.
like, I always like checking out new stuff. And so I was excited when I was like, who's this person Eric's talking about?
yeah, she came to Indy a few years ago. It was cool. So
Cool.
um yeah. So I guess kind of like when you and I talked ska, like do we think the future is just as bright for alt country as the present? Like, I know you've mentioned pretty strongly that it's the original form of musical expression. So I can't imagine it's going away anytime soon. And obviously, it's in the mainstream now.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like it's as big as ever. Like, I
I
mean,
yeah.
like the top guys that are in that sound. I mean, they sell out the arenas.
I think with the amount of access people have to listen to music, there isn't any genre that will die.
Yeah,
I mean, not anymore, unless
yeah,
the music industry totally changes and there's just risk and you just have restriction to hearing stuff. Now you can hear it like you can hear anything you want. So if you like an 80s sounding band,
yeah,
you just type something in the internet and
yeah,
you find 20 80s sounding
yeah,
bands that just started yesterday. I
yeah,
mean,
yeah,
so I think I don't know if the future is like bigger for any
yeah,
particular act, but I don't think anything's going to decline much in popularity as like commercial radio has lost most relevance. I mean, MTV used to be the place you had to
yeah,
go to see videos, and now that's not even a thing
yeah,
like for music
yeah,
videos. It's all based on the current kind of like you know technology lifestyle kind of stuff. So you'll be able to find like hunting for music is way
yeah,
easier now than back when you had to
yeah,
like dig through the I mean people still dig through crates,
yeah,
but like you used
yeah,
to take chances on records or like visit your friend at like the
yeah,
college radio station and
yeah,
like scour and dub like all the records that
yeah,
look cool.
yeah. Or like, you know, a touring band would come through and you know, they'd be on some small label and they'd have like records of the other bands on the label too, like, before you could get it
Yeah.
everywhere, and so that, you'd be like, well, that band sounds cool, so I'll check
Yeah.
this band out too. And then sometimes it was good, sometimes
Yeah.
it
Like
wasn't.
how many bands did you discover because of the thanks list?
Oh
Yeah.
yeah, like
Yeah, sure.
so
That
many.
Yeah.
that's a huge thing, and I
Yeah.
I have I don't know if there's an equivalent to that these
Yeah.
days.
Do you, I guess, talking about how it's kind of in the mainstream at least, or some of the bands, like do we feel that there is ever going to be kind of that underground versus mainstream reckoning? I mean, I don't think we're ever going to have another like Nike
No.
No,
sellout situation, but do you think
no.
we're going to have like a protest alt country band that is going to kind of distance themselves from whatever Mumford and Sons or
Oh,
whatever?
sure.
Yeah.
I'm sure there already is. Like, I just don't know who it is.
Yeah.
But I don't think anything like that will dominate a headline unless it's like two stars in a public beef kind of thing.
Yeah.
Like it's that I kind of joke around how it's like what happened to all this sellout thing? Like there's all these terrible bands that used
Yeah.
to they would have been booed and embarrassed out
Yeah.
of the industry, but no
Yeah.
one gives them a hard time anymore.
Yeah. These Gen Z kids are too nice to shitty bands,
Yeah.
I miss our days of, if you hadn't heard a band, you shit on it until you're proven wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah. You nod your head because it's true.
Those were the good old days, yeah. I mean, I'll never forget my disappointment as a young punk when I saw whatever that terrible Good Charlotte music video was and Tim Armstrong was in it, like kind of like passing the torch, and I was like, no, like we can't do this.
Yeah. Yeah.
I will tell you though that I didn't know this back then, but in just like randomly reading some things on the internet and whatever else, just when I'm, diving down the rabbit hole of like old punk stuff, like even though I don't like Good Charlotte is a band, a lot of the punk rock luminaries of the 90s, like love those dudes. Like
Hmm.
as people, they think that they're always like their heart's in the right place, they're for reals, like all this other stuff, and you know, and I good for them, cool. But it's like I just never would have
Yeah,
imagined
that's
that, like just
crazy.
from seeing and hearing that
Yeah,
band, I would
jeez.
never have thought that
Yeah.
like they've got the bump from, like the the kings of and queens of 90s punk or whatever.
Well, if you ever start to find yourself, liking Good Charlotte or going that rabbit hole, just read the Wikipedia article on whoever it is, Benji Madden, whatever the main guy is who's married to Cameron Diaz now.
Oh,
Got some controversies in his Wikipedia. So
okay.
apparently he's a little bit of a pedophile. So
Oh, well,
There you
I
go.
will say that the things when I have heard people expressing that they were cool, it's definitely not from a 2025 article.
Yeah, yeah,
It's
yeah.
something from
yeah.
2002.
Oh, I mean, well, I mean, unfortunately, that's with all the genres. I mean, Ryan Adams is problematic.
Oh yes, absolutely.
So it's like you can't get away from it in any genre, really. I mean,
I
so
mean, kind of talking what you're talking about before, like, that period of time where you kind of had the shit talking, that you could be gatekeepers, right? I mean, you could kind
yeah,
of erect walls and kind of keep that element out. But now that it's everywhere and the internet is there and it's more mainstream, that that's kind of a thing of the past, and it's just, can these bands wither whatever that bad storm may be, or do they just ride it out and
yeah,
show back up a decade later and like, hey, did everybody forget about our controversy and we're back?
I think it really depends on, I mean, there are a lot of circumstances, but it really depends on, some things start as whispers and are, proven, and some things only remained whispers. And so 10 years later, no one remembers. Whereas the other ones where it's like, here's all the evidence that continued to come up and whatever. And then it's like, yeah, you can't come back from that. And you shouldn't, and you don't
yeah,
deserve to because
yeah,
you're a piece of shit.
yeah,
Yeah, I don't ever foresee like Anti-Flag coming back. I mean,
No.
it's over.
Yeah.
Who knows though? Maybe we'll be talking in a decade and maybe they'll be back on top. So
yeah.
I sure hope not. Any parting words of wisdom? Any last thoughts on kind of alt country and its trajectory and its kinship with punk rock? Are we gonna get Mike, since you're into heavier music as you're getting older, we gonna have heavy alt country? Like, is that
I mean, I think there is some already, like there a lot of bands do use distortion and they use, dynamic, changes and chord progressions and whatnot. And, it just depends on the artist. Like when that's what's kind of cool about the genre. Like there are the guys that singer songwriter acoustic, super slow, mellow, and then there are guys that clearly have a little more influence, other influences, and they try to incorporate it into their stuff. And so I mean, Uncle Tupelo, they covered the Stooges on one of their records, and it's a pretty heavy version
Yeah.
of an alt country song.
It's it's
It's
it's
awesome.
it's heavier than the
Yeah,
Stooges
yeah,
version.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
It's they cover "I Want to Be Your Dog," and it's awesome. So stuff like that. Like, I mean, I think will always be present in that genre too. Like, and as more and more, you know, kids today have so many more influences, than we did as kids. That's really, I definitely had tunnel vision as a kid of like, this is what I'm going to listen to. I think kids now are way more open to different stuff, and so
Yeah.
it's just going to continue to be a mesh of different things, which for the most part I think is cool. And sometimes stuff gets meshed that probably doesn't need to get meshed, but
Yeah.
but I do think like there's a place for heavier stuff in the genre too, and faster and good. I mean, keep on rocking in the free world is. I mean, it's an all country song, but it's rips.
Yeah.
Like it.
Yeah.
It's so awesome. I mean, Neil is the king for me, so it's but like I'll never. I mean, I remember seeing that. It was ever before I even got into the genre. But I mean, I remember seeing him on SNL play that song. I didn't know who Neil Young was. I think I was like 13 years old or something, and they were on SNL, and I was like, "That song's awesome," and then found my way back to it later. Um, and so there's a place for it for sure. Like it's, because for us, my out on Bell, we played a lot of heavier stuff.
Mhm.
In our As we progressed, we got heavier. I feel like,
I think there's definitely I mean there's a dirge element to
yeah,
a lot of a lot of those bands. They might not always sound like that, but like
yeah,
a lot of the alt country bands kind of have like at least a dirgy kind of
yeah,
like like slower,
yeah,
heavier, like heavier topically to
yeah, yeah,
with the heavier sound.
I mean, Hank 3 did that a little bit, right? I mean,
yeah.
I don't know if that was really all country, but
Yeah, so when I was getting into it, that Hank 3 was touring a lot, and his shows were cool because he was,
he would do the two sets, right?
yeah, he's a big metal guy. So
Yeah.
the first half would be his country stuff, and then the second half would be metal. And it was sweet because he'd take the cowboy hat off, and he had super long hair, and then it was just like a sweet, like a badass metal band, and they would still have their fiddler play the metal songs,
Oh,
and
that's
it was
cool.
awesome.
That's cool.
And that for me then too, because I was into metal, so that was like another bridge, like that made it, and then yeah, it was pretty like that was those were fun shows to go to, and that was another was sealed my love of Drag the River when that era. Uh, Scooter and I and another friend, we went to Boulder to go see
I remember this story.
Hank 3, and then we got snowed in Boulder. And Scooter, I don't know if you know Scooter, Pinhead Circus. I don't know if you ever heard of them. They're local heroes here. Uh, and so we got snowed in Boulder. Well, Scooter knew the Drag the River guys. And so we got snowed in. We all stayed at the same place. And as a new musician and just getting to know these guys, I mean, this was like the coolest thing for me ever. And they were just playing Bruce Springsteen songs on the acoustic guitar, and I was like, this is the coolest thing I've ever seen. And so I mean, that sealed the deal of my love for Drag the River for sure. Uh, and those guys were fun to hang out with too. And I mean, it was pretty much right after that that I was like, I'm starting this country, man. And within 6 months, I had it up and going. So it was it sealed my fate, I suppose, of that.
That's cool. It's a good origin story.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, your Neil Young story kind of about him kind of being the genesis for all that.
Hmm.
Like I remember when I was in high school, right? Or probably around the same time you guys were in high school since we're close in age. Like when he did that album or EP or whatever with Pearl Jam, like that
Yeah, yeah,
reintroduced him to like our generation.
sure.
Merkin
Yeah, yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, in the performance, then where Eddie sings the harmonies on Free World is awesome.
hmm
Like, it's super good. Uh, and I was into grunge, and so that was a big influence as well.
Ball.
So,
Yeah.
Yeah, even like I know my dad was always a huge fan of Neil Young, and he used to tell me like back in the '60s or whatever, like he was crazy, and so like the studios and the labels would always pair him up with musicians to kind of chill him out and bring him down a little bit because he was
yeah,
like
yeah,
way out of control. So that's I think he was one of those that had he been born 30 years later, he would have been crazy in the punk scene, but
yeah.
born too early.
It worked out for him though. Yeah,
Definitely. I mean, he's still
he
going
did.
strong.
He did all right.
Yeah, so I don't I have no other knowledge of this subject.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, thank you both very much. It's nice always to kind of have a conversation with something that is a little outside of I know like we were talking a little bit about having the blinders on, and like that was more of my life, I feel like, than anybody else. Everybody else kind of evolved and broke those walls down earlier, and I kept them up way longer than I probably should have. But it's always nice to have these conversations and find out that there are these other genres of music that are, at best adjacent to punk that, I'm a little familiar with, but haven't gone that far down the rabbit hole. So
Yeah.
it's nice to learn what else there is on on the other side of that wall. You guys are amazing. I appreciate it all.
Thanks
Thanks,
for having
Eric.
me. Thank
It's
you.
always a great time, man.
Sweet, let go.